Hello and welcome to This Could Be a Good Time. Today I'm going to talk briefly about death as a lens through which you can see this transition from the old paradigm to the new paradigm. So the dominant way of experiencing death in our current culture is as this negative thing. And you can see this at multiple different layers of society, right? You can see it at the individual level in the kind of widespread avoidance of death and unprocessed fear and anxiety around death and dying. You can see it at the cultural level of our lack of kind of cultural practices or healthy cultural practices surrounding death. You can see it, say, in the medical establishment or in the beauty products industry, right? This kind of obsession with avoiding death, with death as an evil in and of itself that should be avoided at all costs, regardless of what the quality of life is that you're having or what suffering you have to endure in order to avoid death. You can also see it at a kind of more philosophical level in the foundations of our economic theory of this idea of endless growth, right? This idea that any kind of death or slowing down is a bad thing in and of itself, and that what you have to have in order to have continued abundance is this continual, perpetual, exponential growth, economic growth. You can see it also in the way that we, or kind of the perverse underbelly of these kind of attitudes towards death in the way that we handle waste, right? So we have this culture that is obsessively avoiding death, but that at the same time is generating an enormous amount of waste that basically doesn't die, that can't disappear, that can't get reintegrated into any kind of system in any kind of circular way, and just continues through its death. All this waste continues creating death, right? Leaching out into the environment and poisoning water or poisoning other ecosystems, or even if it doesn't leach out, it's this giant pit of unprocessed death, basically, that we're burying in the earth, right? So you can see that's kind of our current model for how we approach death. And what you see if you start looking around is that there are all sorts of individuals or groups of people or festivals, practices, approaches to living, that approaches to economic theory, approaches to managing waste that are starting to integrate this different understanding of death that's much more in line with the way death functions within natural systems, a kind of Lion King circle of life kind of idea, right? That death in and of itself is just an inevitable part of life, that it's a change in form and a necessary change in form, and that this change in form, this death, is something that feeds new life. So instead of creating this death that we're afraid of, that is doing nothing but creating more suffering and death, death under this new paradigm becomes what it has always been in natural systems, which is something that is necessary for new life. So more about this new paradigm. So what you see is an increased willingness to look at and process your fear and anxiety around death. So a couple weeks ago, I went to a death meditation at local dance studio, actually, or performance space, and there were probably maybe 20 people there, mostly youngish, including myself as young, so I don't know, under 50, youngish people who spent an hour meditating on their death. And this might seem really dark and macabre to some of you, but the reality is, at an individual level, is once you look at your fear and all of the anxiety that is generated around not looking at the reality of your death, that's a lot of emotional energy that is getting just kind of hanging out in your unconscious and doing things, impacting your life and manifesting as fears of all sorts of other things. That the more that you look at that fear and are willing to look at the reality that your body is going to die one day, and that you don't know when that day it's going to be, that day could be tomorrow, it could be 50 years from now, you don't really know. And the more that you face that fear and process that fear, the more energy is freed up for life. And in the death meditation, it oftentimes, like anytime you do something like that or some kind of practice of facing the fear, it oftentimes brings this wonderful gift of really clarifying your life for you, of really letting you hone in on what is most important to you in your life and what you really want to focus on. And honing in on the giftedness of your life. There can be all sorts of realizations that come, and everybody's different, right? But regardless of what impacts this kind of practice might have on you, the end result will be positive once you work through and feel and process the fear and anxiety that you're storing up around death. You can also see this shifting paradigm, and there was a death fair recently in Chatham County, near where I live, that kind of put death back in a, like, brought it back into the light, kind of back into a cultural space, but also, bringing in elements of celebration and playfulness and creativity around death, of allowing death to be an integrated part of the celebration of life. So that's a really beautiful thing. You can also see it at other levels, at economic levels, the growing number of at least fringe economists who are envisioning a different way of thinking about how material abundance is achieved, and coming up with frameworks that, instead of this endless growth, are more cyclical and understand and are more organic too in their understanding of how economic systems work and how companies might grow and die and give birth to new companies, and that's okay, and that you could imagine, you can envision an economic system that doesn't rely upon this idea of endless growth, but rather relies upon this much more organic understanding that everything comes in cycles, that there is life and death in economies as well, and to integrate that into the system and the way the system is structured in such a way that it isn't this disruption so much as it is this change in form. So you see it there. You also see it in the growing number of people who are revisioning how we handle waste, right? So that waste gets wrapped back into the natural system, so that it becomes cyclical, right? And that there isn't such a thing as waste in nature, and so that increasingly you have people dedicated to trying to envision ways where there isn't such a thing as waste within human systems either, which is entirely possible, right? We're smart and creative, innovative beings, and we could design such a system. Yeah, so death. If you really want to make the leap and be able to play your part in this new paradigm, you, at some point in time, have to face your own death, the reality of your own death, and process that in some way, and just think about what other implications that might have for how you think about whatever it is you do in the world. Okay, that's it. Thanks for listening.